It's Wednesday on the YouTube, the Football Diehards YouTube channel. Must be time to put somebody on the hot seat. I'm Bob Harris. Where's the applause? I hear nobody applauding. Oh, that's because I'm in my little virtual studio. There is no people here. Hello out there in YouTube land. Thank you for dialing us up. Appreciate you showing up every week. We do this every week, every Wednesday, 7 p.m. Eastern time. I do it again on Saturday at noon. This coming Saturday, we'll have Mr. John Law, the Gridiron Scholar, joining us for a good time, talk about rookies. We're going to talk about rookies tonight, too, because rookies are going to be dominant for a little while until we figure some things out. There are some little newsy items, I could touch on here quickly. A couple things. DeAndre Hopkins says, "What do you mean? Who said I wanted to get traded?" Oh, you said it, DeAndre. You told us you wanted to get traded, but that's okay. Still stuck in Arizona. We'll see how this works out. Hey, Andrew, thanks for coming. Hi, Andrea. Appreciate y'all. We'll give people a chance to come in before I bring in today's guest, who is fantastic, by the way. Quickly becoming one of my super favorite people, mostly because he's willing to come on here and sit with me for some period of time. I'm easy. And it's Mike Faiella. Y'all know it. I'll introduce him in a moment. But DeAndre Hopkins sounds like for now he will be stuck in Arizona. We'll see if that changes. And there's some other players that are kind of stuck in place that are a little surprising. Joe Mixon, Dalvin Cook. We thought there might be moves over the draft. There were no moves. Right? And they seem to have come out of the draft pretty well. We'll talk to Mike Faiella about those guys. Joe Mixon, Dalvin Cook. I think Tony Pollard made out. Cam Akers, James Conner. A lot of running backs made out. Rashad White, although we'll talk about Sean Tucker here a little bit. Undrafted free agent, made a ton of money. Not every running back won. You guys know that. Kenneth Walker, wasn't great. Rashad Penny, sorry, Rashad. Deonta Foreman, it was great knowing you. Alexander Madison with Cook sticking around. I don't know what to make of this. We'll kind of sort that out. And by the way, Jerick McKinnon re-signed with the Chiefs, the thing you were waiting for. If we, speaking of Akers and Jerick McKinnon, if you dial back in from I want to say weeks 13 on, I think that's a safe bet. I think you're talking about your fantasy running backs 4 and 5 from weeks 12 through 18. So interesting, McKinnon, kind of a best ball play, more so than a redraft play, but maybe he shows up and does something. Hello, Albert. Thanks for coming. Appreciate it. Seems like everyone's catching up here, so we'll get down to business. If you have questions, hey, Charles, if you have questions, I'm always happy to hear them. Put them in the chat. If you have comments, anything you want to add to the conversation, happy to include that. Hit the like button and the notification bell and the subscribe-y thing and the YouTube-y stuff that I love for you to do. I'm going to go ahead and hit the dislike button just so somebody has done it. I like to break the ice. I know some of you don't want to do the dislike. It's okay, man. We're all right with that. Again, questions, whatever. If you don't know, I'm from FootballDiehards.com. It's a website. You can go there, use the promo code DIEHARDS to get a 15% discount. That's a great deal. We're starting working on the magazines, the Fantasy Football Pro Forecast, and all the Pro Forecasts every year. We see a lot of work from the people at DLF, Dynasty League Football, articles, rankings, etc. And so we're going to bring on a guest from that very outfit today. He's a great dude. You know him as at Daddy's Home FF on Twitter. You also know him as Mike Faiella. He's a writer at Dynasty League Football, also works for Trophy Smack. And he does great stuff, and he knows about Dynasty, and I think that's very important because he knows more than me. I like to talk to people who know more than me. It's very helpful. Mike, how you doing today?
I'm doing great, Bob. I told you this feels like Christmas to me. I get to hang out with you twice in the same week. How lucky am I?
Right, that's the danger of coming on my radio program on Saturday night. You might get asked to come on the live stream on Wednesday.
No, I'm honored to be here, man. I can't wait to chop it up with you.
Glad to have you. Robert, hey, how you doing out there? Again, if you have any questions for Mike or myself, and we're going to talk Dynasty and talk rookies, but ask us anything, right? If you have any questions at all, we're game to answer them. Mike, before we get into some of the Dynasty stuff, and, everything is related to Dynasty, probably through your eyes. It doesn't matter. It's Dynasty, damn it. But we're playing best ball. We're doing a lot of stuff right now. I want to talk Aaron Rodgers, showing up in New York for the Jets. Showing up for some workouts. Sounds like he'll do more than he's done in recent years. But the Garrett Wilson love is going off the charts. Rodgers this week comparing him to one Devontae Adams. They both were 17. I don't know if should the comparisons continue. Great rookie season, right? 83 catches, 1,100 yards, 4 touchdown catches, playing with lesser quarterbacks. Seems like he'll have an upgrade, but we're already drafting him like as a tail end wide receiver 1. Is there any room for him to rise up the ranks and join those truly elite receivers this year?
To the truly elite, no. I just think that it's not going to happen with the Jets. I think they're a balanced attack. I think Rodgers is going to spread it around. And let's face it, he's bringing every one of his friends to New York, New Jersey with him. So exactly, the whole gang's there. What I like about Garrett Wilson is just how polished he was. But this is where I think, Bob, we get ourselves in trouble when we look at rookies like Garrett Wilson and Chris Olave, for example, and we expect this meteoric rise year 2 when you're kind of double counting. They were the ones that were most pro-ready coming out of college. They ran in that Ohio State offense. They were outstanding route runners, which is what got them on the map to begin with. So to expect him to really grow more in the second year isn't going to be the same as a project-type receiver that we've seen in the past. Like you saw Tyreek Hill, other folks kind of jump off the page the second year that needed some work. Garrett Wilson was already ready-made. It didn't matter who the quarterback was. The man gets open. Now, the question is Rodgers going to hyper-focus on him, or is he going to feed his buddies sometimes? I'm projecting him to have a little bit of a jump, but this rise to what I'm seeing now, I saw him going 4th overall in a startup draft. That's still too rich for me. He's still down in that, 112 to 201 turn with Olave. He's becoming a little overpriced for me, but where I have him, I love the rise. I mean, the stock goes through the roof, and I might be moving him, and because people are buying at ceiling right now. You love to see that and love to take advantage of it where you can.
That's the thing to me. I mean, I felt like we were already buying him at a ceiling. Now he's got to bust through the roof and do a little more based on the excitement. And of course, Coop, would like to imagine all of them driving from Green Bay in a Woody wagon with Aaron Rodgers probably on some sort of hallucinogenic in the back of it. I'll throw that part in. So, big expectations for the New York Jets. Big expectations for all this rookie class. Probably greater expectations than we should have, right? And by the way, Coop, I appreciate you coming around. We're going to get you on here soon. There will be no escape, young man. John Bonneville, great point. They're both the most pro-ready. So let's kind of take that to the new wave of Ohio State talent. Not like the new wave of British heavy metal, which continues to get dissed by the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. How they don't let Iron Maiden in this time, I have no idea. Why it took 5 years to get Rage in? You tell me. Anyway, I digress. Let's dive into the Ohio State guys. Mike, rant over. Ohio State, so C.J. Stroud, Jackson Smith, and Jigba coming in. Let's start with the quarterback position. I think the safe play seems to be Bryce Young going to Carolina. Great coaching staff. They're rebuilding the skill players around him, but they've got some reasonable players. Stroud goes to Houston, where it's going to be a little more of a struggle, you would think. And then we'll talk a little bit about my guy, Anthony Richardson in Indy. But let's start with that top, those Ohio State guys. C.J. Stroud going to Houston. How confident are you he will? I mean, how confident are you? Let's do this. Rank the top 3 from a dynasty perspective. Rank those 3.
And we talked about this in the radio show. You have 1 and 1A with Richardson and Bryce Young. And realistically, the makeup of your team and the style that you play will determine who's your 1. You want to play it safe, it's going to be Bryce Young. Highest floor of the quarterbacks, bar none. Like, he has that perfect floor. He has the great coaching staff, like you said, great setup in Carolina. Number 1A, Anthony Richardson. This is the guy who could light the league on fire. The most athletic quarterback we've seen in a long time. So if I'm swinging for the fences, I'm going to go Richardson 1 and Young 2. If I have that really great team where I need to slot in a quarterback 2, I'm going to flip those. But those are a tier break for me. Then you have Stroud. I shed a tear, not only because he landed in Houston, but also because then what they did to get the number 3 pick, giving up their 24 pick, where I was really hoping they were going to tank, get Marvin Harrison Jr., get him a real receiver in there, because Tank Dell is you hope they do. But I mean, what they did with with the receivers this year, I don't love the guys they picked up. Picking up, what was it, Tank Dell and Xavier Hutchinson. It's not enough with Nico Collins and Johnny Mechie. It's just not enough to put around this kid. So I think you're looking at 2 years of pain. And what happens at Dynasty, we're fickle. You know that, Bob. So C.J. Stroud is going to become a buy at the end of the 24 season, but he's not somebody I want to spend a high pick on right now, because you're not going to be able to cash that out quickly.
I'm very irritated with the Xavier Hutchinson slander. He will be on the bottom end of my dynasty rosters for generations to come. It's impossible. We get those guys, those receivers, and we can never let them go. I have the same problem with running backs too. Said the guy who has Isaiah Spiller and Joshua Kelly still on many of the same rosters. They're going to get it right one time in Los Angeles, I swear. So I'm with you on the quarterbacks. I feel the same way. I wish Stroud had gone to a different, but I mean, there was certain picks that were going to happen. The Texans being the wild card there when they went with Stroud too, and they jump up in the draft. And we can argue if that was a terrible screw up or whatever on their part. We'll find that out in the future. But let's talk about the other Ohio State player here. And by the way, on Richardson, I think we both agree he's the lottery ticket here. He's the possible $1 million winner. Why don't you talk a little bit about what you think about him?
So what I think about, there's obviously off the charts with the athletic, build, the makeup. What makes me a little bit nervous about him realistically is that you don't tend to see a huge jump in rushing from college to the pros, and you really need that for Anthony Richardson to reach his ceiling. So you have to have Shane Steichen really use him the way they was using Jalen Hurts. Now, the problem with that comes in is they have one Jonathan Taylor. And are they going to protect their quarterback by running it with the running back? Is it going to take them a little while? And there's not a ton of weapons around him. So I think if you make the pick of Anthony Richardson, you need, and I can't stress this enough, patience. There are going to be some games where you feel like you have a world beater, and there will be some games where you feel like he's not fit for the NFL. Very similar to what you got from Jalen Hurts. If you remember correctly, Philadelphia fans were calling for him to be replaced after his first year. And now, second highest was the highest paid player in football. So I think you need that same patience with Richardson if you're going to draft him, because if you're looking for that home run, it may not hit in year one. The system isn't perfect. Yeah, it's going to hit eventually for you, Bob. I have faith in him, but I don't think it's going to be year one. So I think what you have to do is take the good with the bad. But the problem is with Anthony Richardson, you're not going to want to put him on your bench because the second you do, you're going to miss that 40-point week. So you have to just throw him in the lineup and hope that you hit those hit weeks and hope that the low weeks don't kill you.
In other words, you have to do what the Colts are fixing to do. It seems, if we're to believe Jim Irsay, who basically said he's the starter going in, it makes sense. And you mentioned Shane Steichen, who not just his development of Jalen Hurts, but prior to that, his involvement with Justin Herbert during his rookie year. And what I thought was interesting about that, Mike, is they took different paths. Those both teams with the rookie quarterbacks, where we had Herbert throwing the ball more than anyone in the NFL his rookie season, and they went with a run heavier approach. So I like that fact that they have some experience to fall back on, unlike Anthony Richardson, who has damn little of that, but still love the upside. Good evening, Royal Slade. Thank you for coming. Appreciate y'all showing up. Again, if you have questions, throw them in the chat. I'll get to them and throw them at Mike, who will deftly bat them back at me and make me feel silly with his extensive knowledge. Talked about, let's go to the wide receiver, Jackson Smith-Njigba, another Ohio State player. So, there are some people who, maybe think that he's the sharpest of these guys. We didn't see as much of him last year. He was injured. What are your thoughts on his skill level in general compared to the rest of the class?
Through the roof. He's your number one with the bullet. All I needed from the combine was to see that he was healthy. When you talk about the hamstring injury, those agility drills where you saw that he came in top right corner, the highest of agility skills that we're going to see. I needed to see that. The 40 time wasn't something that I cared about, but he did come in actually a little faster than I thought. But it was those agility drills. Is he healthy? Because when he's healthy, you saw him light the world on fire. I think the highest number of receiving yards ever in a bowl game, really cut out a large chunk of an offense for himself, despite competing with Garrett Wilson and Chris Olave. What else did you want to see? He was the top receiver on that team, and we're talking about Garrett Wilson and Chris Olave right now in the bottom end of the first of startup drafts. So what else could you possibly want? Now, the fear that people have was the landing spot. I don't care. Number one, you have two outside receivers. It gives JSN a chance to start in the slot to begin with and get those targets. Tyler Lockett, I love the guy to death, but let's face it, he's not getting any younger. So it is going to give JSN an opportunity to move outside in the next couple of years. I think that's a real opportunity. But those slot targets are already here with the much improved Geno Smith. I like the landing spot, and I absolutely love Love the player. So he's my wide receiver one, bar none. There's no one touching him in this class, in my opinion.
Yeah, I think we'll talk about Jordan Addison, who maybe got a more fortuitous short-term landing spot. But for Smith and Jigba, I think people are worried because Seattle's so run heavy; they're crazy with the run. But also, Shane Waldron seems to be making inroads. Comes over from the Rams. He's the offensive coordinator. Has been there a couple seasons now, and some slot receiver there. What's his name? Cooper Kupp has done pretty well for the Rams in that offense. So I also have some hope, maybe a little longer term than Jordan Addison, who was, went at the tail end of this group. And by the way, John Bonneville had a good point on Pittman, Pierce, McKenzie, Downs all feel slightly below average as a group. But hopefully Jelani Woods and one of those other 39 tight ends that they have in Indy can help out a little bit. Good afternoon, Mr. Scampers. Seahawks killed the draft, but Charbonnet and same backfield as Walker. We'll talk about that here. But, Jordan Addison maybe gets the best landing spot. Let's talk about those next three, right? Jackson Smith and Jigba. We had Quentin Johnston go off to Los Angeles. We had Zay Flowers go to Baltimore, Jordan Addison to Minnesota. So kind of run through the ranks of those guys as you see them.
Sure, your wide receiver 2 is Jordan Addison, like you touched upon. Really the most fortuitous landing spot of anybody for his skill set. He is meant to be a Robin to somebody's Batman, and that Batman happens to be the best receiver in football. In Justin Jefferson, it's on a pass-heavy offense. You love to see the landing spot. So realistically, Jordan Addison is probably the receiver that's going to put up the most receiving yards as a rookie this year. I think he's just that set up. He's that type of player. Really fluid route runner, but what he's not is a world beater. He doesn't have an elite skill set. He has a very good skill set. So when you look at ceiling for him, I do like the fact that I'm settling into that kind of Devonta Smith type role, which has been great for fantasy. I mean, I think Smith was, a top 10 or 11 wide receiver this year. So no shame in that. Coming up next is Quentin Johnston. This is the guy who is just the enigma for all of us. If he can put it together, man, it's lights out, but he plays small. For the biggest receiver in this class, at least from this top group, he plays small. He's not going up and high pointing the ball. He really looks like his teammate Mike Williams in the style that he plays, and that is not a compliment. I'm not a Mike Williams fan. But he looks like a guy who hasn't put it all together. And then lastly is Zay Flowers. As much as I like Zay Flowers coming out, going to Baltimore, going to that run-heavy offense, getting Lamar Jackson back, and really going to what's now become, strangely enough, a crowded wide receiver one with Rashad Bateman, Odell Beckham, and now Zay Flowers. And hell, you're even looking at the guys that were there last year. We're still putting up numbers. Devin Duvernay was not a zero last time. And, of course, Mark Andrews. So you have a lot of mouths to feed there. And Zay Flowers, I think, if you talk about how great Jordan Addison's landing spot is, I'm equally as depressed by Zay Flowers' landing spot. So I've dropped him considerably on my board.
I feel like we'll put some hope in a little bit of the optimism of the unknown in Todd Monken. And I don't know how unknown he is. I mean, a great 2-year run the last 2 seasons. The Georgia offense has been amazing. He's shown the ability to use a lot of the kind of talent they have in Baltimore, meaning a lot of 2 tight end sets at Georgia over the last 2 seasons. So maybe Isaiah Likely can continue to be maybe a little bit of a thing. But I'm kind of with you on the rankings of those guys. Let's do this. Let's talk about kind of the top of the running back class, the top tier, and then we'll dig a little deeper here. A few comments out there. John Bonneville, Addison going to have more receptions and yards than Thielen had last year. He tacked on his goal. And what did Thielen have? 100 targets or somewhere in that range last year? It wasn't like he was absent. And so, and also KJ Osborne had a ton of targets. I think he was pushing up towards the triple digits, along with TJ Hawkinson. So seemed like there was a lot to go around there. We'll figure out how that's going to play out here over time. Joe Herbert, Haybear likes JSN a lot, but he faced the 3rd best quarterback every week with Olave and Wilson in the mix. I still think he will do well, so that is a fair point there. Robert, we'll get into the later round players a little bit later on, but he's mentioning Antoine Green in round 7 to the Lions. Looks like a great deep threat. I thought they had one of those And Jameis Williams.
Yeah, it'll be there week 7. They'll have one eventually in week 7.
Week 7 eventually. So let's hit the top of the running back tiers, and then we'll kind of dig a little deeper as we dive in through all this. And I did have some other questions we'll get to on the wide receivers as well. All of them, just some general dynasty thoughts. By the way, this is Mike Faiella. You can follow him on Twitter at Daddy's Home FF. I hope you will do that if you don't already, because he's fantastic. You find his work at DLF and at Trophy Smack. So be sure to do all that, and also like, subscribe, all the things you do on YouTube. It's fantastic. We love that. So the top tier, Bijan Robinson. I have not seen a dynasty mock draft, a dynasty startup, a rookie dynasty draft, super flex, whatever, that Bijan Robinson has not been the first player off the board. Tell me why we're so excited.
Well, we were excited before the draft, just looking at what a complete player he is. Honestly, if Jamir Gibbs didn't exist, Bijan Robinson would actually be the best receiving back in this class by quite a bit. And I think when you look at him as a pure runner, he's so outstanding between the tackles. He bounces outside, but then you add in that he's a pass catcher, and he is just phenomenal. He is in that Saquon Barkley-esque class, that rarefied air. And then what happens? He gets top 10 draft capital and goes to a coach who wants to pound the ball. This couldn't be more perfect. We ended up on Thursday getting the best news possible for these running backs, starting with Bijan Robinson. Oh, that landing spot. He's getting 350 touches right out of the gate. The offense is good enough. As we know, Drake London, Kyle Pitts, there's a good enough cast around him. They're not going to be able to stack the box. Sure, they're going to test Ritter, but I think he's good enough to at least take the pressure off. What's not to love about the player and the situation and the upside? I mean, I don't think you can get ridiculous about Bijan Robinson anymore when you talk about your projections for him. Like, I just don't think you can go too far with how excited we should be as a dynasty community about this player and about this landing spot.
Yeah, I mean, even in redraft, the early best balls, he already came out smoking, right? I see him moving up into a top 5, in some. I got him the other day, I think just after the draft, just when it was the middle of this week, at number 9. I thought I want to get a share before it gets even more expensive. We drive everything up like that. Hello, Mitch Zimmer. Thanks for coming. John Bonneville put up his house to get Bijan in an auction draft. Seems reasonable, and I think
that's
Mike
fair.
agree with that. That's fair. Jameer Gibbs, and by the way, Tyler Algier down the stretch last season, I want to say it was fantasy running back 8. He's just a guy, people. Tyler Algier is just a guy. Bijan Robinson, not just a guy. So really super excited to see this. And don't be surprised, Arthur Smith, this great offensive mind, it's been a little bit of a struggle. It's been an uphill climb. I think he's getting enough pieces in place now that we can start to maybe see some of the genius level offensive thinking that maybe got him this job. Hello, Dave. Thank you for coming. So Jamir Gibbs, surprisingly, the 12th pick, the Detroit Lions apparently evaluated very highly. I said they would have taken him 6. So we'll see. I guess they're assuming Bijan would have gone off. I'm assuming they didn't have him ranked above Bijan, but maybe, who knows? Maybe they did. Talk a little bit about this landing spot. DeAndre Swift moved quickly after that. He goes to Philadelphia. We can address that at some point here as well. But let's just talk about Jamir Gibbs, who I thought I was really going to like going, somewhere maybe a little later in the first round, maybe early second round. I love, not a big guy, a 200-pounder, but has that, once you get below sub 4.4, I start getting excited. So he's a 4.36 guy, like that an awful lot. What do you think about the landing spot with, great offensive line, also David Montgomery there?
I love it. I absolutely love it for 2 reasons. Number one, you hit on the offensive line. 1-yard touchdown through the roof. Jamal Williams was just falling into the end zone untouched over and over again last year. He looked like Sean Alexander at the goal line for all of you old folks. Like he just got in all the time, and you love to see it. But what does Gibbs do? 2 things. Number one, he is the most explosive player in that backfield. We saw Montgomery even losing work to Khalil Herbert prior to the injuries. This is a player who is good but not great. But the second thing is that Jamir Gibbs walks in, and we hinted at this earlier with Jameson Williams' suspension. Jamir Gibbs walks in as the second option in that passing game for a quarterback who we know loves to check down. in Jared Goff. So what I tell people is that don't just look at Dave Montgomery, expect some two-back sets, expect some of those wheel routes, expect some of those dump-offs, screens. I think you're going to see a lot of that in play, and Jamir Gibbs is a home run waiting to happen. So you're going to see 85-plus targets. In PPR, this guy is gold, and the landing spot is dang near perfect, especially when you tack on the draft capital. What people need to make sure that you're paying attention to is when a regime invests in a player. You saw the previous regime didn't invest in DeAndre Swift. So what did they do? They kind of sidelined him. But now they're going to do everything in their power to prove themselves right. After being ridiculed in the media for going number 12 on Gibbs, they will do everything in their power to prove that this guy is a star in the NFL. And I just love that, because that means they're going to feed him the football. And this kid is so talented. You're going to get him for a little bit of a discount, because people think that 1 pound makes a difference. If he was 200 instead of 199, all of your spreadsheet friends would love him. I'm going to be okay with that. I'll get him a Twinkie and a Coca-Cola. He'll be fine by kickoff. But in reality, this is a star. This is a home run hitter, and this is where the NFL is going. And I love it. This kind of positionless offensive weapon. I think he's going to touch the ball way more than people expect his rookie year.
Yeah, that's why I always fudge and say he's 200, because I know that everyone's going to get all excited if it's 199. So we'll see about that. Comment, doesn't it feel like John Bonneville, doesn't it feel like Montgomery takes most, if not all, the goal line work? Or was that just the Lions completely out on Swift? I think you may have answered that, but I kind of, I kind of agree with you, Mike. I think this is going to be a heavy usage thing, but Montgomery's going to be there.
Oh, he definitely is. But when you look at how many 1-yard touchdowns they had, I want to say there was 17. The coach will ride the hot hand. So if Gibbs happens to be on the field during that time, with this offensive line, he's more than capable of falling into the end zone. I think what happened was two things. They had basically given up on DeAndre Swift, and at least if you believe the rumors are true, DeAndre Swift has kind of given up on himself. Every time he was nicked up, he was pulling himself out of games. So I think that DeAndre Swift hurt himself as well. I don't think you're going to see that from Gibbs. So what I think you're going to see is far more of a split at the goal line than you saw with Williams and Swift, because I do think it was really a coach teaching a young kid a lesson, knowing that either of them were going to get into the end zone. That can happen. But again, when we talk about trying to prove themselves right, I think you're going to see Gibbs get more opportunities than Swift did last year.
It's funny. I kind of thought Deuce Staley leaving and heading off to Carolina to work under Frank Reich was maybe that was the conflict, right? Because we heard, Staley from the time he was there talking of, this past offseason in particular, learning the difference, or last year's offseason, learning the difference between pain and injury, that old school kind of talk, and it just never played out. So when he moved on, I thought, wow, maybe this will change the dynamic a little bit, and it did. Just not in Swift's favor. Maybe he just didn't bite kneecaps hard enough. So yes, Mr. Scampers will take the discount on both Detroit backs. And so will I. If they're going a little cheap, I'm happy to have either. I'm not disappointed in my Montgomery shares, which I was getting outside the running back 2 range, honestly. Miles Sanders as well. We'll talk maybe about him a little bit. But by the way, Scampers is pointing out the Rams have a Hard Knocks series that just released. They were hyping Cam Akers and Van Jefferson. It's just a head up for the sickos. Look, I was hyping Cam Akers, and I will continue to do so. I think he's, the only game in town. We talked about this a little bit on Saturday night, Zach Evans being a draft pick that they added that you're not as high on. I thought, man, maybe a semi-clear path to workload. If something happens to Akers, you're not as impressed.
I'm just not impressed with the player or the offense. So you put those two together, and I'm kind of out.
Fair enough. All right. Golf Boy says hello to his football friends. Hello, Golf Boy. We're happy to have you here. Again, this is the Football Diehards YouTube channel, on the hot seat. Mike Faiella here with me at Daddy's Home FF on the Twitter. So go see him there. There's all kinds of great stuff. You find his work at DLF and Trophy Smack. I talked to Matt Walsh this week. He's what a ball of energy that man is. Incredible, the Trophy Smack master there. Well, let's do the top of the tight ends, and then we'll dig a little deeper. Dalton Kincaid is the top of the heap. Matt Waldman's really keen on him, thinks he's going to turn into a real playmaker, maybe have some value this year towards the end of the season. I think that's maybe possible. I think mostly it makes Dawson Knox, almost undraftable. I don't know. I mean, best ball, he moves him from the tight end 12, kind of where he's at outside that range, and who knows, anything's possible out there. What do you think of Dalton Kincaid as a player and a fit in this offense?
Very good player, very good fit. I think they used the tight end. You saw that with Knox, who isn't the player that Kincaid is. He isn't the athlete Kincaid is, and you saw what Knox could do in this offense. Like you said, he was a top 10 tight end. That said, what are we doing with the tight end position? If you're not going elite, you're going cheap. So I just don't see myself giving up a lot of capital for Dalton Kincaid or anybody in this position. I think I told you the other night, the Laportas and the Musgraves of the world that I can get a lot further down the draft are more likely to end up on the end of my roster. But in reality, it's just a position that is so difficult to predict. You're needing to predict touchdowns, and Buffalo, of all the teams, is so unpredictable with how they're going to score. With the beast at quarterback that might just run it in from the 5-yard line, you have Stephon Diggs. Maybe Gabe Davis figures out how to play football this year and catches a couple touchdowns. We'll see. I don't have that much hope. But there's just so many ways this team can attack you that they're not just going to feed the tight end. And when you look at the tight ends that have really ascended, it's the situation that they're in those target monsters, the Travis Kelce's, the Mark Andrews, the Darren Wallers. I don't see that with Buffalo. So I see him falling into that tier 2 grouping of tight ends, even at his ceiling. And you can get some older people in that tier so much cheaper.
Yeah, John Bonneville wants to know if Kincaid could play in the slot for the Bills. I will go out on a limb here and say he absolutely will play in the slot. You'll see him and Dawson Knox on the field a lot in that big slot. We keep thinking Khalil Shakir, it's time. Maybe not, says Dalton Kincaid. By the way, Toronto Dave, whose location may give away his fandom. And if it doesn't, the hashtag Bills Mafia at the end of his comment. Will thinks Kincaid could be electric. Royal Slate agrees, and definitely interested. John Bonneville, Lions going Laporta over Mayer, and Packers going Musgrave and Kraft over Darnell Washington. Mind equals blown. Laporta, to me, he's kind of the guy on the rise, getting some really good buzz. I think of the landing spots. He's in the landing spot I wanted, right, in that Detroit offense. We saw what happened last year. I mean, TJ Hawkins is super good. After he left, the touchdowns started going to the tight ends. So maybe Shane Zylstra and Brock Wright will continue to get them. But we'll see. I kind of think Laporta's in a good spot. What's your level of interest there?
Decently high. I mean, I'm talking about a 3rd-round pick because Laporta is coming as my tight end 3. You mentioned Michael Mayer as the tight end 2, falling in Vegas. Very good spot. But yeah, Laporta is a good player in a great spot. And like you talked about, if the tight ends catch touchdowns, which the Detroit tight end started doing, that's all that matters. That's the difference between tight end 24 and tight end 6 on the week. We talked about the lack of weapons there in Detroit. They added Gibbs, obviously, but there's still balls to go around. So I like Laporta, but I like him at the cost that I'm seeing him go right now, which is that bottom of the 2nd, beginning of the 3rd in non-tight end premium leagues. Again, if you can get away with not spending a large amount of draft capital on him, I like the player. But if he starts creeping up to that low to mid 2nd round, I'll pass on him as well. I'll take my shot of the guy with a chance of carries. A Chase Brown, for example, a Tajay Spears, a Tank Bigsby, over Laporta, for example.
Right. So there we have it. And by the way, we're obviously talking from a dynasty perspective, people. If we were talking redraft, we probably would not be talking about most of these tight ends, and some of the players we're about to get to in this discussion as well. Some of the later picks that we saw go in days 2 and 3 of the draft. We'll start at the quarterback, Will Levis, who, there was a lot of ups and downs going into the draft weekend. I feel like if things had played out differently, Will Levis could have easily gone in the top 10. I think the thing that held him back was the Texans, right? They, the way that pick went, and then Colts got Richardson. I think they've said they would have taken Levis. I don't know what he's going to be. He seems to be a pretty polarizing character, but he ends up in Tennessee. So if you're investing from a dynasty, like let's say in a super dynasty superflex, I mean, Levis seems like a guy who might have a chance to play this year, but certainly is the quarterback of the future in Tennessee.
Yeah, and I think that's why you have to look at him at the bottom end of the 1st round. I'm seeing people telling me that they're getting him in mid-2nd. That's an absolute steal. Any quarterback who might get snaps in a Superflex league has to be off the board mid-2nd. That includes Levis, that includes Hooker. Have to be off the board. Absolute musts. But when you look at Will Levis and you look at the way that this draft fell, you could very easily make a case for
Right.
him anywhere from 8 on, right? I mean, and when you're rolling the dice, that position gets so thin in Superflex. I'm going to roll the dice on a guy who I know is the future plans, at least. Malik Willis is a failed project. They spent almost no draft capital on it anyway. He was a 4th-round pick. And Ryan Tannehill, I feel like they've been trying to move on from for about 7 years now, or however long he's been there. I think since he got here, they were trying to move on from him. So I do think that Levis is going to get some run this year, and I think they hand him the reins next year, which makes him a very good value at 108 or beyond.
Yeah, that's I've done one Superflex rookie draft. It's the draft before the draft. Shane Manila will talk about it if you ask him, and he won't say nice things. Not everyone's a fan of drafting before the draft. In fact, not anybody in the league is a fan of drafting before the draft. What are you thinking, Scott Barrett? Damn you. Anyway, I digress again. So Levis went 108 there, and I thought that was, that seemed reasonable before the draft. It still seems reasonable now. I probably would have still taken him there, maybe even sooner, depending on your quarterback situation. Beyond that, you mentioned Hooker Hendon, who goes to Detroit, gets a year at least. What is his long-term outlook in your estimation?
That's the one that makes me nervous for 2 reasons. Number one, you're talking about an older prospect. He's 25 years old. Number two, I think Hendon Hooker's future does actually rest on what happens in Detroit this year. If Jared Goff can play at the same level he played at last year, or possibly even step it up just a slight bit, there were rumors that Detroit wants to extend him. That would be just about the end of Hendon Hooker's dynasty value, because at that point you're talking 2 more years, 27 years old before he even takes a snap. What are we actually investing in? You can get quarterbacks that are NFL proven, off the waiver wire or for cheap, that are about the same age as this man. I hate the fact that he had the injury. I hate the fact that he's coming out older for him and for his future. But if Jared Goff has a good season, Hendon Hooker may be a career backup, and that's the scary thing we're looking at from him.
All right, let's get into day 3 quarterbacks. Jake Haener has drawn a lot of Brock Purdy comparisons, and obviously you look at some of these quarterbacks that win on day 3. I think a lot of people are looking for that next Brock Purdy, even if they're not drafting him as Mr. Irrelevant. Of all these guys, who interests you the most, and why is it Stetson Bennett?
It's, of course, Stetson Bennett. I mean, he's the guy who interests you the most for a few reasons. Number one, landing spot. He ended up with the Rams with the old quarterback with the broken back. You love to see that as being the only thing stopping you. Obviously, he's done it on the biggest stage. This is a guy who did it at the top of the college football world, So what else could you possibly want for a dart throw other than a guy who's done it before, and a guy who literally has a player who you have to worry about not only his back but his shoulder, and had contemplated retirement over the offseason, as we understand it, holding him back? I mean, he's going to beat out John Wolford, who I believe is still the quarterback 3. I haven't paid that close of attention to the Rams because they're awful.
I looked at their roster. They don't have anybody else listed on the current roster that I saw. So it may
even better.
They may have, yes, even better, exactly.
So yeah, no, that's why he's the guy you're looking at. But what's fascinating is you pointed this out. I think because of what happened with Brock Purdy, you saw so many more day 3 quarterbacks go. I don't think these guys should thank Brock Purdy. Like, send him an edible arrangement or whatever the man likes, because he got you all drafted. This wasn't happening pre-Brock Purdy, but now that's all anybody wants to do is find the next one. It's hilarious to me because it's Kyle Shanahan that made that happen, not Brock Purdy. And these guys aren't Kyle Shanahan. It's just not going to happen. But being with McVay in that offense gives Stetson Bennett the best chance of being possibly something.
By the way, since I last looked, Dresser Wynn has been added to the Rams depth chart, a undrafted free agent this year. So anybody else in that group of guys that went late, we mentioned Aiden O'Connell, Clayton Tune, Dorian Thompson-Robinson, who I'm not a fan of the landing spot, goes to Cleveland. Clifford, Jaron Hall in Minnesota. I mean, like John Bonneville mentioned, commented on your Hooker talk that at that point the Vikings will trade a 5th-round pick for him. So Jaron Hall goes to Minnesota. I mean, the future there seems like, it's pretty wide open. Is Hall a guy that could turn into that kind of Purdy-like player? Or are they looking at next year to draft the backup?
They're looking at next year to get somebody, or they'll grab somebody off of the free agent wire. You're not going to mess around with the situation that they have now, having invested in both Justin Jefferson and Jordan Addison. You're not going to bring in a project quarterback for that system. This is a team that wants to win. It's funny, Hendon Hooker was my dream landing spot, was Minnesota. I was hoping he was going to go there. Once he didn't, I got sad. But no, I've kind of moved on of anybody else in this quarterback class. What's going to happen is, even if you don't draft him in the first 4 rounds, they're going to be there on the waiver wire. The second those bye weeks hit, these guys are going to hit the waiver wire. So I'm not investing unless it's the deepest of leagues, like maybe Ryan McDowell's kitchen sink league, where I have like 40 people on the roster, and I'll just be drafting anyone I've heard of by the end. But that's, other than that, if you're playing in a regular league like most of us do, 25, 30 bench spots, there's no room for these guys.
We need to get you in the Diehards Dynasty when there's an opening. We got 16 teams, or 2 16-team leagues, 50-man rosters. The waiver wire is fairly thin, I can tell you that. Dame overboard. I wasn't able to speak the DTR to Rams into existence. I was with you there. That was one of my late picks in that pre-draft draft, hoping that he got a good landing spot. He didn't, so we'll have to live with that. Let's look at the running backs. The day 2. I think Zach Charbonnet is the most notable there. Obviously, the first one off the board. Kendre Miller to New Orleans. Tyjae Spears to Tennessee. Devin Achane to Miami. Some people really like him. Take Bigsby to Jacksonville. Of that group is, Charbonnet, obviously. It seems like most of these guys are more like, spoilers where they are. But maybe Kendre Miller has a chance to be more.
So Kendre Miller definitely does. I have him now as my running back 4. I think in New Orleans he has a good spot. He's competing with just Jamal Williams, because let's face it, if the law doesn't get Alvin Kamara, Father Time will, undefeated. So one of these things is going to stop Kamara, leaving only Jamal Williams in front of him in the depth chart. But the guy that most excites me is Devin Achane. Falling into that zone running scheme, we talked about this with Miami, was a dream. If anybody knows how to use speed, it's Mike McDaniel, and this kid is pure speed. So I actually have both those players over Charbonnet, because, number one, Charbonnet was a good player, but really needs that workhorse load for me to become a great player. Minimal receiving usage, a little better than Ken Walker, but that's not saying much, is it? That's like saying he's a little taller than Kyler Murray. So, it's not that impressive to me. But Achane and Kendre Miller are the guys that I think are going to get touches, and I like going for the home run hitter. And I know people are going to tell me some team small running back. I like him tiny and quick, but man, Achane in a zone running scheme has those flashes of a Chris Johnson type player. I saw a player profile mention that first, and once I saw it mentioned, it kind of jumped off the page for me. Like, dang, I remember liking him too. But Achane and Kendre Miller are really the guys that I think are going to pay off fairly early. And the one guy we didn't mention in that group who would round out that tier of running back that I'm actually excited about is Roschon Johnson to the Bears. You mentioned earlier. Yes. Goodbye, Donta Foreman. Those are really the group of 4 that should be off the board in the first round of one quarterback leagues or by the mid-second round of Superflex leagues. Those are your running backs that you want to invest in. Then there's a major tier break after that.
Right. You mentioned Johnson, the first of the day 3. Israel Abanikanda went there. Chase Brown goes to Cincinnati. After that, it's kind of catch can. I mentioned Zach Evans going to the Rams. There's a whole handful of guys. What about Sean Tucker signing with Tampa Bay? They gave him a fair amount of coin, a little more coin than most of these undrafted free agents get. Any thoughts there on his opportunity going to Tampa Bay, where there's not a lot behind Rachaad White? Chase Edmonds, I think we've seen the experiment. It's has failed. And what's the other little fella? Why is he escaping me? Because he's done nothing. Oh, my God. Help me out, chat.
What are we looking at, Tampa?
Yeah.
I'm trying to remember who. Keyshawn Vaughn.
That's
Is that who you're thinking of?
Right.
Yeah.
God, old age. It's
we So sorry, John Bosch. John Bosch was in love with Keyshawn Vaughn a couple years ago. Sorry, John, that didn't work out either.
Sorry, John.
So the big thing we have to worry about with Tampa is, does Lenny come back? But if he doesn't, I absolutely love the landing spot for Sean Tucker. What I also like about Tucker is, and I want to make sure we don't overrate this, he did drop further in the draft than he should have because of heart concerns that have since been cleared. But he was dropping anyway. He had a very weird intro to the league. He didn't show up for the combine. He didn't test out. Then he sent in a YouTube video and just claimed he was the fastest man alive. It was a very strange situation. And then did a super late pro day, which I think turned some other people off as well. So there were a few things that are unusual with Sean Tucker. And why I point this out is unusual situations usually bring value. Right? It's very obvious for you to look at, this guy went in this round, which means the team values him, which means I should draft him. But if you could find these strange situations and how we got into them, that's where value is built. And I think Sean Tucker, great landing spot, unusual situation. So I think we have a chance to see him possibly take some touches away from Rachaad White. And if you remember, Bob, you did a draft before the draft. I don't know how far before the draft you did it, but around January, February, this guy was being talked about as like running back 3 in this class. So we're not talking about a scrub here. We're talking about a productive running back who had a very weird offseason and then fell possibly fortuitously into a really great landing spot and a very light depth chart. So he's a great dart throw for late 3rd, early 4th round picks.
Yeah, I think, that day 3 group, Roschon Johnson is it for me. I have invested in him already, and I'll probably continue to. I just think there's a fairly clear path there. Previous regime brought in Khalil Herbert, who I think has been perfectly serviceable, but and Deonta Foreman, kind of just a guy, but a guy that's been moderately successful the last 2 years. So good for him. By the way, Royal Slade, so not surprisingly from north of the border, mentioned Nathan Rourke, the former BC Lion, who signed on to the Jacksonville Jaguars. We'll see what happens with them. Not a lot behind Trevor Lawrence there. A couple others here, comments. Tucker, probably one of those guys where you wish you could hide him until the draft. Maybe so. Loves the uncertainty, Mike. Uncertainty does. I mean, that's the thing. Anything that creates value, whether it's a controversial situation, like Alvin Kamara is a prime example for me. I didn't want to draft him. I don't want to draft him. I can't stand drafting him. Yet here I am as he falls into the double-digit rounds in some best ball saying, well, we're at the point. So that's the key here. Everyone has value. It's all a matter of price. And even Javonte Williams, who I have 0 shares of at this point, and I would like some more clarity before I start gaining shares, but there's going to come a point where the price falls enough for me to not give a damn what the outcome is, because he's going to turn into a free square at some point as we keep getting the uncertainty. And that's what we're looking for. Value, people. That's all it. Maybe target Mac Hippenhammer on the wire in that Diehards League. Everybody's gone in that Diehards League. It's a barn burner. It is full dynasty, so you're starting 22 guys every week. So it's a good time. All right, let's go ahead. So are you with me, though, kind of in John Bonneville, P. Ryan to the moon right now until we know any better? Yes. So are you with me, though, Roschon Johnson is a day 3 running back to have? I mean,
he is, yeah. I think the only other guy that we have to keep an eye on because of, again, the uniqueness of the situation is Chase Brown. I think Chase Brown's a guy we have to see what's going to happen with Mixon. We talked about this on the radio show. The new compensatory rules have now passed. What that means is that people can now sign free agents without giving up compensatory picks. So if you think of the way the system works, for anyone who's not familiar, you gain picks by teams signing your players, right? But if you sign someone else's player, they will cancel each other out. Now that is passed, you have, I want to say, about 12 teams that earn compensatory picks that can now sign free agents without penalty. This is important because the offseason's not over yet, and guys can show up and be signed. So like your Lenny Fournettes, for example, there's a guy who could end up somewhere else, and we have to see where that is. But if Cincinnati decides to move on from Joe Mixon, and if Chase Brown is only competing with Chris Evans in that backfield, well, you got to give him a look. That's a great landing spot. However, I don't think that's going to be the case. I think Mixon ends up back with Cincinnati. I think he ends up back where he belongs, and I think Chase Brown becomes an afterthought like everybody else we have drafted in Cincinnati to be Joe Mixon's backup that never got a shot at it. We do this all the time. But it's at least someone you have to keep an eye on. Tajay Spears, another one that you want to at least keep an eye on, but obviously he has no ACL. Yes. The guy seems to have 0 cartilage in his knee. Here's the thing. Remember, we talked about uncertainty bringing value. I tweeted this out. We don't care about longevity of running backs. It's a fool's errand to bet on longevity anyway. So if this brings a discount, take it. Take the discount. Derrick Henry's going to be starting this year. But heck, at some point, that man has to slow down. It might be when he's 40, but at some point he'll slow down. And maybe Tajay Spears' knees will get healthy during that time. Maybe we'll have some breakthroughs in medicine. But if that brings a discount, take it. And Tank Bigsby, again, he's an ETN injury away from having a great spot. So you have a few guys to keep an eye on. But yes, to answer your question emphatically, Roschon Johnson is the one in any of this grouping that we just talked about that you want. He's the guy you want to invest in. He's the guy who got the great landing spot and who was discounted in the draft because he couldn't beat out what has been a generational prospect in Bijan Robinson. And that is totally understandable and completely okay with me.
Toronto Dave points out Chase Brown, a Canadian. So clearly one of the best in the
Dave
league.
will point out every Canadian.
Don to Foreman truther is John Bonneville. He likes Roschon, but feels like Foreman earned a role. We'll see about that. And he may well have, right? I mean, it may be that way to start the season. Or also, I mean, the investment in his was not so great that he has to be on the roster when the season starts. We'll find out what goes on there. Day 2 wide receivers. Mike, by the way, this is Mike Faiella. He's really smart in case you hadn't already noticed. He does really great work at DLF. You should follow him on Twitter at Daddy's Home FF. At the Twitter. Day 2, Jonathan Mingo is the guy we're all excited about because he got the draft capital. Should we be excited? What's to be excited about beyond the draft capital?
Not much. I can tell you that when I got divorced, I created more separation than Jonathan Mingo has in his career. It's just never happened for the man. He got outplayed by his own teammate at Ole Miss. This is someone who, realistically, when you take a look at what happened here, there were very few prototype wide receivers. You know, when I talk about alpha size, this was the year of small wide receivers. Mingo comes in and has prototypical size, and all of a sudden people are comping him to A.J. Brown. The production in college wasn't where I wanted to be. The separation on tape isn't there. The route running isn't there. And you're talking about Carolina, who, honestly, as much as you might want to feel a little gross about it, does have some other options in Thielen and in DJ Chark already on the roster. Bryce Young can throw it into a pane of glass. So the separation is not a complete killer from Mingo, but you may have people who are more open. There might be better options. So I think Mingo makes me a little nervous that is he even going to be Terrace Marshall and get on the field as a wide receiver 3. I'm not positive of that. So I'm letting people overdraft Mingo, and I'm pretty much not going to end up with any shares is my guess.
All right, I thought Jeff Ratcliffe made a really good point. He said Jonathan Mingo is like the version of Laviska Shenault. Laviska Shenault is a rough draft, and Mingo is the version you turn in at the end of the class to the professor. And that doesn't mean he's going to be something, but he's just a kind of a shinier, more polished to maybe Laviska Shenault. So a couple comments in there. Mingo, the next Laquan Treadwell. That means in 5 years he's going to have a good game. So the rest of this group, Jaden Reed goes to Green Bay, where they have a total kiddie core of wide receivers there. We could talk about that. But Rashee Rice goes to KC. I think anyone who plays with Patrick Mahomes gets some love. Marvin Mims to Denver maybe is in a good spot. You mentioned Tank Dell previously going to Houston. Jalen Hyatt to the Giants. Some speed for that wide receiving core, probably much needed. Cedric Tillman, a lot of people really like them. Don't love the landing spot in Cleveland. Josh Downs been mentioned in the chats to Indianapolis. And Michael Wilson, I think, is a guy that I've seen some interest in. The guru, John Hansen, loved him during the draft night. Lands in Arizona, where maybe there's some room of that group. Which were the ones you're focused on?
So the one that jumps out number one, first and foremost, is Marvin Mims going to Denver. I love that spot. There has been a lot of rumors of moving on from Courtland Sutton. So being that wide receiver 2 or 1A with Jerry Jeudy and a Sean Payton offense sounds spectacular to me. This is a good player. I liked him pre-draft, loved the landing spot. So Mims is the guy that rose to the top for me. The next guy you really have to put on the list, obviously, is Josh Downs. And I like talking about Josh Downs because there's good and bad here. There's that Jekyll and Hyde. The good, the man catches everything. We talked about the light wide receiver room in Indianapolis, and we talked about how they just picked up their quarterback in Anthony Richardson. Now let's talk about the bad. We think Indianapolis is going to be a run-heavy offense. I think we all agree that's their style. Josh Downs has never put his hands on a cornerback during a running play in his entire college career. Go back and watch. I will Venmo anyone $5 if they can send me video of him blocking, because he doesn't do it. So what that's going to do is that's really going to limit his time on the field, and it's going to make it so those two receiver sets, he's not going to be there. Those potential run plays, he's not going to be on the field, which I think ultimately is what made him fall in the draft. I was on with Dynasty Island, my friend Rich Cooling, before the draft, and I said, this is going to hurt Josh Downs. That's what scared me about him, because pass catching wise, he's a first-round pick, but he's not an overall football player, and you have to wonder how that's going to affect him. But he is the number 2 of the group. And then, like you said, you have to give some love to Rashee Rice, but I would still have him below Jaden Reed, who'd be the third person I have out of this group, falling to Green Bay. Love the spot. I like the player. Rashee Rice, we talked about it before. I can't give you an argument over Patrick Mahomes about why I would like Rashee Rice. If he wasn't on Kansas City, he wouldn't be on anybody's draft board that high.
That seems like a reasonable. So day 3 wide receivers, there is a handful of them. Does anyone in that day 3 grouping that floats your boat at all, or that you have interest in as a developmental player?
That's 2 of them. So we have Puka Nacua going to the Rams and Kayshon Boutte going to the Patriots. Those are the 2 names you probably heard of coming out of the draft and ended up in decently fortuitous situations. Boutte is a hard one. I mean, we don't know what he is. He was potentially a first-round pick as recently as a year ago. Obviously fell off the map with character concerns. He went to New England. I think if anybody doesn't put up with character concerns is Bill Belichick. So if he's comfortable with them, at least you have to give him a look. And then Nacua really playing that Robert Woods role. You have to like the landing spot there. Not much outside of Cooper Kupp on that team as well. So I like those 2 players as dart throws, but be very careful. These are dart throws. These are late 3rd, early 4th round picks. But if you're going to throw some darts, those are the 2. And like you mentioned, you can go ahead and talk about your guy, Xavier Hutchinson going to Houston. At least you have to give some thought to, because Nico Collins, John Mechie, and Tank Dell don't feel like guys that are insurmountable if Hutchinson can play to his potential.
Like the player, don't so much like the landing spot. For a handful of these guys, I'm with you there. Let's look at the final round. By the way, so a couple comments. John Bonneville wanted to know if the Broncos are looking to deal Cortland Sutton. They continue to say they are not, but everyone says they're not until they are. I think he's probably available if someone was willing to offer the right price. Jerry Jeudy, they obviously picked up the 5th-year option. He'll be sticking around. So I do think Sutton's expendable. If not this year, I don't know that he'll be around next year. Toronto Dave praying Downs would go early 2nd. He did not. The tail end of the tight ends. We had talked about some of those day 2. I know Joe Hebert was lamenting the addition of Luke Schoonmaker to Dallas, where it dilutes the Jake Ferguson and Peyton Hendershot. Let's not forget him. This seems like it's going to be a 3-way mix. Brenton Strange, I could make this stupid joke because it was a strange pick. Oh, I just made the stupid joke. Tucker Kraft, the 2nd tight end, along with Musgrave, going to Green Bay. And Darnell Washington went to Pitt. And I think that there was a comment in there by, I think, Mr. Scampers, or maybe it was somebody who mentioned that. Oh, Royal Slade. Washington will be underwhelming for fantasy. Yes, and he is maybe a better real-life player, but also it's, there's already tight ends there. His name is Pat Freiermuth. He might be better. So kind of that group, if you had to take one, we already talked about Laporta and Mayer. Of that rest of those guys, who do you like?
Oh, I don't. I really don't. And that's what bothers me, is that we talked about this class coming in, and it just gets really underwhelming. I don't even think Darnell Washington's a good football player, not even a good real-life football player. I'm seeing him whiff on blocks constantly. But I guess if you have to take somebody, it's going to be Schoonmaker. I still think it's Jake Ferguson's job to lose, but they spent a 2nd-round pick on him. I like to think they're like me in fantasy drafts, and they tilted because they thought they were getting one of the good players, and once the run was over, they just grabbed whoever was next on the board. But it is a good spot. Yeah, but it's a good spot, Bob. You know what I mean? It's a good landing spot. It's a good offense to be in. But here's the thing. In dynasty leagues, there is a way to play and there's a way not to play. And the way to play is simple, is that When you get to this point and you start saying, hey, who do you like in this group? The answer is the running back who's one injury away from carries. That's your answer.
Right.
So you take that. Take 7 running backs before you take one of these tight ends, because I don't think there's going to be value in any of them. And if there is, it's going to be fleeting. It's going to be week to week, and it's going to be extremely frustrating. So for me, Schoonmaker if I have to, but I don't want to.
Except for the one John Bonville pointed up, Zach Kuntz to the Jets in the 7th. That's a winning move. Okay, maybe.
Yeah, gotta love it. Gotta love it. He tested through the roof. You gotta love that.
Right. He was a darling. I think part of the deal for this receiving class and the tight end class is, it's pretty even, right? And I mean, there was a lot of guys that people graded highly, but it pushed all their prices down. And so we'll see. I mean, it could go either way for some of these guys, but yeah, set your expectations accordingly, especially if you're drafting in Dynasty. We're going to do this. We're going to call it a night tonight. If you have another question, throw it in there. I'll try to get to it. But Mike is going to come back in the near future. He doesn't know this. He's just learning this now with the rest of you. But we're going to just talk some of the Dynasty theory, because I think it's a great, topic for a program, especially as people are heading into their Dynasty drafts, where we, kind of can talk about roster construction and roster building and some of the approaches that are the best practices for those of us who play in the Dynasty leagues, and especially those that have like 32 teams with 50-man rosters. So Mike Faiella, what do you got going on right now? What should people look for?
So not much going on right now. Honestly, last year, speaking of the show you're going to bring me on that I just found out about, last year I wrote about 25,000 words on Dynasty Theory across really anything you could want to know about, from startup drafts, rebuilds, rookie drafts, bankroll leagues. All the topics that we love to dive into are all on DLF. I'm going to try to expand that series probably in a couple weeks now that the draft is over. So hit me up on Twitter if there's things you want to hear about, if there's strategies you want to know about. One of my favorite things to do this time of year is write articles for people who are thinking about joining Dynasty but are a little scared or don't know how. I try to give them all the tools to be dominant year one. So I think I'm going to expand that series out. And that'll be for the bulk of the offseason. And then I just show up for my friends. I love doing shows like this. I love talking football. So I guess you'll find me on with Bob whenever he is gracious enough to invite me back.
Talking football, it's a skill that Mike Faiella has. And he will be back. Appreciate y'all coming. Thanks, everyone. Appreciate all the regulars. I'll be on the SiriusXM Fantasy Sports Radio channel again Saturday night, 7 to 9 p.m. Me and Dempsey will be on. And I'll be here Saturday for the next live stream. John Law of the Gridiron Scholar. There will be rookie talk.